What if a single nation triggered the next Bitcoin supercycle? Not a company, not a hedge fund, not a billionaire, but an entire country. Imagine the headlines. A government announces it has moved billions into Bitcoin. Overnight, the world's financial map changes. This isn't science fiction. It has already started. El Salvador lit the first spark. The question is not if another domino will fall. The question is which nation will be next. And if you believe Bitcoin's revolution is inevitable, subscribe now and hit like, because this is where we cut through the noise and look at the real forces shaping the future. In 2021, El Salvador became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. To critics, it looked like a gimmick, a publicity stunt by a small nation with just 6 million people. But history will remember it differently. El Salvador didn't need to move markets with size. It shifted the narrative. It proved that a sovereign nation could break free from the dollar standard and place Bitcoin at the heart of its economy. Of course, the experiment wasn't easy. There was IMF pressure, there were technical struggles, the rollout wasn't perfect. But here's the important part. El Salvador is still here. The volcano bonds are moving forward, tourism is booming, and the country hasn't collapsed. The first domino fell, and once the first domino falls, others start to wobble. So who's next? Look first at the emerging markets crushed by inflation. Argentina has lived through wave after wave of currency collapse. A new president with a pro-Bitcoin stance has already taken office. If any major economy has the incentive to leap into Bitcoin, it's Argentina. Then there's Turkey. The lira has lost more than 90% of its value against the dollar in just a decade. Ordinary people are already using Bitcoin and stablecoins to protect themselves. The government hasn't made the leap yet, but public demand is enormous. Nigeria is another hotspot, one of the youngest, most digital-savvy populations on Earth. Despite government crackdowns, peer-to-peer Bitcoin use exploded. In fact, Nigeria ranked near the top in global adoption indexes. And don't forget Venezuela and Iran, countries with massive natural resources but broken fiat systems. For them, Bitcoin isn't just an investment. It's a lifeline against sanctions and isolation. These nations have one thing in common. They are on the edge. And when you're on the edge, you are forced to innovate. But what about the giants? What happens if a superpower makes a move? The United States is already indirectly exposed through ETFs and corporate holdings. The government itself has seized Bitcoin from criminals, and it holds more than most small countries. But imagine the Treasury announcing that Bitcoin is now part of official reserves. It would be the final stamp of legitimacy and a supply shock like no other. China is a paradox. It banned Bitcoin mining, but Chinese miners once dominated the network. The government has confiscated Bitcoin, but it hasn't publicly embraced it. Yet in a world where dollar hegemony is questioned, can China afford to ignore the hardest money on earth? Russia faces sanctions, capital flight, and limited access to dollar markets. For them, Bitcoin isn't a nice-to-have. It's a potential weapon, a parallel system that can't be blocked by SWIFT or frozen by the US. When superpowers move, it won't be subtle. It will shake the foundations of global finance. So, let's play this out. What happens when a nation announces it has bought Bitcoin? First, the bond market reacts. Investors begin to question the safety of fiat-denominated debt. If a country shifts reserves into Bitcoin, it really signals distrust in the dollar, and that ripples through every corner of finance. Second, the IMF and World Bank panic. These institutions, they depend on control, and Bitcoin absolutely undermines that control. We would see pressure, threats, maybe even sanctions against early movers. But third, and most importantly, the price of Bitcoin would, explode. Why? Because Bitcoin's supply is fixed, 21 million, no more. Every coin a nation-state buys is one coin less available for the public. And nations don't buy in millions, they buy in billions. That kind of demand would trigger a supply crunch unlike anything we've seen before. The market isn't ready, and that's exactly why the move would be so powerful. When one nation buys Bitcoin, others will be forced to respond. It will become a geopolitical arms race. Think about the nuclear age for a second. One country built the bomb, then others, they had no choice but to follow. The same logic really applies here. If Argentina or Nigeria made a big move, neighboring countries would fear being left behind. If Russia or China embraced Bitcoin, the United States couldn't afford to ignore it. And once the first G7 country joins in, it's basically game over. Every central bank in the world will scramble to get a piece of the 21 million. This isn't just about economics. It's about national security, sovereignty, and survival in a new monetary era. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Governments are slow, bureaucracy is heavy, politics is, well, messy. But individuals, people like you and me, can move today. That's the advantage. You don't need permission. You don't need a law passed in Parliament. You can simply opt in. That's why Bitcoin has always been a bottom-up revolution. First cypherpunks, then plebs, then institutions, and finally nations. By the time governments wake up, individuals who acted early will already be ahead. That's the irony, isn't it? The people who were mocked for stacking sats will be the ones history remembers as visionaries. So what happens when a nation buys Bitcoin? Everything changes, markets shake, politics realign, history pivots. The only question is, will you already own Bitcoin when that day comes, or will you be one of those trying to buy when it's already too late? If you found value in this, hit like and share it with someone who still doubts. And if you believe the Bitcoin revolution is unstoppable, subscribe now and join us here at Alpine Hodler, where we don't chase noise, we stack truth. Because the revolution isn't coming, it's already here.